Good afternoon, everyone. This is Network Situational Awareness with flow data. Some of you may have seen what may seem like a part one. Okay, maybe I'll do this.
We can't hear you.
I can hear you.
All right.
All right. Test.
4 days.
Much better. Okay.
This is it,
Again, so restarting here. Network Situational Awareness with flow data. Some of you may have seen a part one type of talk about this, and I wouldn't really call it a part one and a part two because the previous talk was like really in depth on really what makes a flow, the termination conditions, all kinds of really in-depth stuff that at the end of a day like this, I could probably expect to have to like wake you up at the end so that you'll know to leave. Because the in-depth stuff kind of gets in the weeds a little bit. So instead today, we're going to talk about a little bit more interesting stuff. Some pretty pictures and whatnot. I am Jason Smith. I am a big car freak. I like to take things, maybe junkyard stuff, just, bare metal, and kind of throw it together. I love to weld. And so like the car you see right here, it's a replica of an old Lotus Super 7. That's a car that, as of last Tuesday, I just got it licensed. So I have a license plate now, and I can actually drive that on the road and put people at risk, because I'm quite sure that's what it'll do. I say I'm an IoT enthusiast on the slide, but it's only really a buzzword to kind of catch attention, because it's really more microcomputing, things like that. I don't care about having hair dryers talk to the internet and stuff like that. More like to just make gadgets, hook them up to cars, hook them up to whatever I can hook them up to, and make them do funny things. Originally, this car was intended to do all kinds of nefarious activities, using like linears for CBs and hack RFs and stuff like that. But all of that's super illegal, especially when you extend it on over the course of a city. So I didn't do that. I'm also an amateur fry cook, I guess you could say. Big Chick-fil-A fan, was pumped about lunch today. And so in the process of going to Chick-fil-A about 2 times a day throughout the week, I decided I would buy me a pressure fryer, the big steel crank on the top, and you crank that down and you cook all kinds of food in it. Pretty much anything can be, dipped in egg, thrown in some flour, and then cooked at 360 degrees or so, and be better, I think. I've worked for a few government agencies, state and federal, a few different DoD groups. I used to work for the state of Kentucky. Moved over to FireEye after doing some work with those guys. And have been at FireEye for almost 3 years. I guess it's November. Work with the best team ever. I can say that and get bonus points because they're in here. I'm always pulling little hijinks, so I have to make up for it by calling them the best ever. Shameless plug for Applied Network Security Monitoring, which right here someone may win. And there's a copy there, and there's probably copies in most of your pockets. I'm sure you all love it. But one of you will win it today if I don't forget to give it away. And so the book was written by analysts for analysts, and I guess the thing to say about it, because it's been out for a while, but 100% of author proceeds go to charities, Rural Technology Fund, Kiva, Hope for the Warriors, Autism Speaks, a few others. Chris Sanders is right there. I'd point the laser at him, but probably get him in the eyes. But yeah, there he is, face palming. So what are we talking about today? I'm going to try to go through this more or less quickly, because normally when I talk to people about flow data, it kind of slows down as they glaze over, and I realize I should probably speed up instead. We're going to keep it exciting though today. So what is flow data? We'll talk a little bit about what it actually is, just kind of a basic summary about it. Why is it really important? Why should you come away from today and say, man, that was a good talk. I should probably set this up in a couple minutes. And then some flow basics, just kind of, what is a flow? What do we call flows and things like that. We'll talk about how to collect it, and sometimes more importantly, how not to. A lot of people get themselves in situations where they'll set up this nice flow solution. They're like, yeah, I'm really doing it right. And then realize they have to clean it out every day or every 5 days or every 30 days. And, when I think about flow data, I think about indefinite collection, where you never delete it, where it's easy as cake to just add on storage, and that, a little bit of storage goes a long ways with it. We'll use it for situational awareness and some examples, talk about some detection and response uses, and I'll show you again some tools of the trade. So what is not on the agenda and can be found at that link from a previous talk in Nashville, I went in again to in-depth flow descriptions, all the little details about, a lot of the fields, the difference between version 5, version 9, etc. Won't talk about that today because it gets kind of boring. The data type comparisons, what are the difference between flows and J flows, etc. Any kind of broad collection methods, I'm not going to go into details about those. Instead, I'm going to go into the collection methods I like the most and that I recommend the most. There are some that aren't great. There are some that are really excellent. I'll also not go into any analysis methods with silk. Now, you'll see some silk output, but it's just as an example by comparison of other things. Hopefully, in the end, you'll see that it's extremely cheap to set all this up. So what is a flow record? So it's easiest to compare it to full PCAP because everyone knows what full PCAP is. It's, the end-all data type that, if I have PCAP, I have everything. And, I would say that's true, but usually it's a matter of really parsing it. Chris Sanders gave a talk about, the efficacy of data types, and he gives some numbers by comparison, but, sometimes it's like, to really do it justice, you have to compare them, one-to-one. That if you aren't already a really serious expert with PCAP, you don't know the other tools by which you can churn through it and automate, actual parsing of it. Because PCAP on its own won't do you a lot of good if you're just saying, I'm going to do network security with PCAP and Wireshark, because that's not going to go a long ways. So flow data would be something akin to the phone records that you might get from your phone company if you somehow still get mailed phone records. Whereas PCAP data is like a full recording of the phone call. Now, across an enterprise, consider, I want to record every phone call for, 100,000 people, versus I just want to see the records of what 100,000 people kind of did. One, you wouldn't be able to do anything with easily. One, you could do a lot with, especially if you could churn out some statistics and had some tools to parse it. So that's kind of the approach that we're going to go with today on really how do you parse that stuff. How do you parse these huge amounts of data? When I say huge amounts of data, the comparison might be something akin to like Mount Everest versus a molehill. A molehill that's about the height of me, still not a super tall molehill, but if a mole came out the size of me, you would be pretty scary. But literally, so 29,000 feet is roughly Mount Everest. So, I would be, 0.01 to 0.02% of the size of Mount Everest. So the storage requirements. So this is that little car I built. This is a big Belaz 75710 PCAP truck carrying a lot of data, a lot of PCAPs. This little Caterham, which mine actually is a little heavier, but the R500 weighs 1,014 pounds. It would be a kind of a comparison if you stacked 6 of these trucks and then you compared the little tiny car there. So, even, picture in your head how zippy the car is compared to all these trucks. And it makes a cooler point, even though it may not actually be accurate performance-wise. When you consider the actual time that, the dwell time of an adversary, you would talk about average times of, 140 some odd days in an environment. It really helps to, actually have a long, just long period of time that you can actually look back. And I don't know many people that have 140 days of PCAP data, especially in any, environment of any kind of decent size. If they do, it's some sort of, zany index stuff that's going to take a lot of effort to actually, go retrieve and a lot of time to actually, break that out and look through. Whereas with, PCAP, with NetFlow, you can just kind of say, oh, well, I know the time period that I need. I may have 2 or 3 years of flow data. Let me just look at that time period and, grab some stuff out of that. And maybe I can take that and go to some, metadata or some bro data or something like that, and get more context, and maybe make a conclusion. So flow data itself, what is it as a summary? Well, we often call it session data. We call it flow data. We call it net flow a lot. That's a proprietary term owned by Cisco. They own a lot of different little net flow terms, version 5, version 9. There's a lot in between. Some are skipped, basically. But the basics are that it's this 5-tuple. So you have, source IP, source port, des IP, des port, and protocol. Sounds pretty simple, and it really is as simple as that. There are more fields that are associated, packet sizes, things like that for the entire record. But for the most part, when people think of flows, they think of just this 5-tuple. We associate the times for which the records start and the records end, that's essentially it. We'll stack them up if termination conditions are met. Termination conditions might be, timed conditions. They may be configurable size conditions. A lot of times, an analyst will see, a series of what looks like some sort of beacon or whatever, and really what it is, just an extended communication where a bunch of termination conditions are met. I associate, this flow generation, the flow building, usually like an assembly line where you have this person who, these packets are coming in and he or she says, oh, well, this has a unique, SIP-DIP pair of some source port, des port, and protocol. I'm going to put this in this little basket here. And I'm going to really think about it when other packets come in to see if those are unique or if those are not unique. If they are unique, keep throwing them in this basket until a certain time, passes where either they don't show up or a certain time passes where they've continuously showed up and I need to, the basket's kind of full by my configuration and I need to get a new basket. So when basket is the flow record. So this is our engineer, and say he or she, because this is Silence of the Lambs, and Buffalo Bill had a thing where he wanted to be kind of either one. So he puts the packets in the basket, and as a new unique record comes along, he's actually handling a lot of baskets at this point. So generating and collecting network flow data. This is the fun part, assuming it goes correctly for you. If it doesn't, it can be an annoying part, but usually it's not. Usually it's pretty easy. These tools, basically, when you just kick them on, even in their default state, they'll start doing something for you. Silk eventually gets a little complicated, but we'll talk about that. So in general, you'll need either some sort of router that can export flow data. A lot of people say, yeah, we have a lot of that, and I recommend you to take caution against doing that because a lot of these devices will send you sampled data, and sampled flow data won't do you a lot of good. It's going to be poor for statistics for the most part. That's basically the best thing it will be for, but it won't be great at that. It will definitely be terrible for any kind of incident response. So you really want unsampled flow data. And if you can generate off some routers, you may find it's a lot easier to take sections of the network and send it from specific spots, label them as certain sensors, and it'll be nice. But usually that's not the case, and you won't have control of that. Instead, usually I recommend setting up sensors that have software flow solutions, like fprobe or YAF. fprobe being a version 5 flow generator, and YAF being a IPFix flow generator. Again, there are multiple types of flows, IPFix, JFlow, SFlow, NetFlow, a bunch of those. But we're not going to talk about those because basically a lot of those are vendor specific. The flows we'll talk about today are IPFix and NetFlow version 5. So how do you collect it specifically? Well, you can collect NetFlow data using any kind of sender, which you'll send it, but you actually want to take it in and actually parse it and do all kinds of things. I like Silk the most. That's what I kind of grew up using. Argus is great in its own ways, and NFDump is awesome. A lot of people use NFDump and NFSyn, which is the visualization aspect of NFDump. But we'll talk about Silk and other tools today. There's also some general log aggregation solutions. I don't always recommend those, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But a lot of people will use Logstash and Kibana and whatnot. And there are a lot of tutorials out there, probably more than anything, about using Elk to handle your flows. And it may be great in very small environments, but you'll see that some storage issues occur, some speed issues occur. There are some other issues. Despite all that, I guess Argus is already installed in like Security Onion. And who went to Security Onion conference yesterday? Okay, so quite a few. Mark right there. So a lot of people may or may not use Argus. I'm not sure because I've heard many times that there's the thoughts about maybe Brocon is good enough, and maybe people aren't actually turning on Argus and things like that. But hopefully I'll convince you that a pure flow solution is something you should really have. And I think the next numbers will show you why. Who actually uses a flow solution right now? Awesome. So far, the best numbers yet. 90% to anyone watching the video that can't see the audience. So the flow data tool comparison. So we'll talk about raw solutions like Silk compared to generic log solutions like Elk. So basically, Silk has a compressed binary format that it uses across this flat structure. Essentially, what you have is as new flows come in, they kind of just get thrown into just some sort of directory structure by time and date. And essentially, when you call a query, it's calling out that directory structure as you call that query. So once you actually get to using it, you kind of see the correlation between how it's even set up, visually, when you just ls through that directory, and when you're actually calling those queries. Silk can be used pretty quickly to examine any data from any time, and I put an asterisk on that because you don't really want to say, oh, I want all the data for the last year at once. Because what are you going to do with that in the first place? Not a lot. Even for trying to narrow it down, you won't do much with it. So I say, stay to a week's time if you can. You can draw a lot of statistics in that week. It is not reliant on indexing. That can be good or bad. It's not relying on archiving. You can say that's good or bad. Because, a lot of the speed that you get from tools like Elk come from the indexing. The cons would be that it's flows only. So, a lot of people are like, well, you say I should have a flow solution, but I have all these other data types. And I would say that may be a case where you want to consider a lot of storage and actually using a solution like a generic log parsing solution or something like that to handle your flows. You're probably going to pay a whole lot, though. I mean, if you can, you're better off pivoting from a real flow solution to that other log collector. It is also not very extendable in its basic, easy setup, specifically Silk. So Silk, we've made it pretty easy to set up, but if you want to go crazy with, using Python with it and using all these, trying to make APIs or whatever for tools like Chive, you're probably going to have a hard time without a little bit of extra work. But it's not impossible. I mean, if you're developing your own tools, you may find that it's actually quite easy. It's also, not all solutions are created equal. Again, I mentioned 3 just now. They're going to be different for everyone. I use Silk all the time because I find it easiest. I don't think the other ones are as easy to use. Their learning curve is a little more difficult, but that's my opinion. Your log solutions, obviously, there are several front ends you can use. We talked about, Kibana right now, and it's pretty awesome. You can make all kinds of pretty graphs. You can pretty much do whatever you want to with it. It's pretty extendable. Tools like Splunk are like working with clay. You can pretty much do anything you want to with it, and that's pretty awesome. But the downside, again, is storage, reliability, things like that. In the end, Splunk might cost you a whole lot when you're sending tons of flows to it. There are some tools, though, that have flow-specific pricing models. So even some security solutions like I guess QRadar uses a different kind of flow solution that they want to charge differently for, and it's basically all because a lot of complaints happen that say, oh, we have all this flow data, but you're going to charge me, an arm and a leg for this stuff, and there's no way anyone can do that. And it's true. I don't know many companies that are able to do that, and they usually end up doing this internally instead. So, what is the big difference? This is a pretty junky chart. But, you see this little strip of red up there, and that's Silk compared to Elasticsearch. on storage retention. The difference being that Elasticsearch uses 28 times more storage than Silk for the same amount of data. I have the asterisk down here that says, all this was created simultaneous generation on a pretty beefy box, and all the collection was from both solutions, and both are compressed in this case. Still 28 times difference. I'm not, an expert with Elasticsearch like some people are, but I'd say they would have a hard time, whittling that down to anything that's reasonable. Screenshot there of, just kind of some of the output. Also, that was 4 million flow records, in case you're curious. Go back one bit. 4 million unique flow records. So how do you get started with flows? Again, the actual number of raised hands for people watching was, maybe 15% in here, which is pretty good. And maybe you had some shy people, so like 20%, being optimistic. But how do you actually do all this stuff? So again, we'll talk about Silk. It was made by the guys at Carnegie Mellon. It's an awesome tool, excellent documentation, all kinds of great things. You'll use YAF to actually generate the flows. YAF is different than Silk, but it's also made by the same guys. And basically we will, kind of show how to query those with different filtering and statistical tools. We'll talk about FlowBat. It's the front end that Chris Sanders and I developed for Silk. FlowBat's pretty awesome, and then it adds a lot of features that you can't do in Silk, namely quickly making a query. That's the first thing that's kind of a frustration when you're at the command line. You're like, oh, well, let me add this thing into the middle of this partitioning switch or something like that. And you go to that, and you try to type it in, and maybe you mess it up because you don't really know what that switch is because there are tons of them. Well, FlowBat does a lot of things like autocomplete, and it actually allows you to use the mouse with it. So it also removes a lot of the learning curve for junior analysts, as well as teaching you how real Silk queries are. To get started, it's pretty fast. We just have two little scripts, which I'll kind of demonstrate here in a few minutes. In the end, it takes about 13 to 15 minutes to install both Silk and FlowBat and have them up and running to where you're running queries and doing whatever you want to. So that's pretty quick, and it only requires, maybe 10 seconds of total user time, and then it does the rest of the install on your own. So Silk, again, it's made by the guys at the CERT Network Situational Awareness team. It's two suites. It's a packing suite and it's an analysis suite. The analysis suite can do a lot of Unix-y type things, so I recommend when you're using any of these tools that I'll mention here, in the next few minutes, that you don't try to pipe a bunch of raw output to a bunch of Linux-y type things, because then you're just going back to this raw, these strings and whatnot. You're not using the binary format that is optimized for. And, if you want to look at the documentation, again, there it is. So the actual collection architecture for generating flows. Here we have a NetFlow version 5 F-probe sensor. You may have a router that hopefully is doing unsampled flow generation. And you have this YAF sensor that's doing this IP fix stuff. It's sending all these flows to this security server, be it, whatever you've built. Maybe it's Security Onion or whatever that has the Silk packing suite on it. Specifically a tool called RWFlowPack that's all installed with this package. RWFlowPack says, I'm going to store all this in a way that you could probably read it, and the analyst will either SSH to that and run some commands directly, or FlowBat will be installed on that security server, and then the analyst can just go there in the browser. To get started, as a review, we have a flow source, which is some router, or some switch, or some sort of software generation, like YAF or F-probe, again, installed with Silk on a box. We have a Silk server. It's some sort of security server that you're sending all your data to. Then we have the analyst workstation. The workstation will probably just browse directly to that server and access FlowBat. FlowBat will again be installed on the Silk server. A lot of times we install Silk, the analysis packages as well, on that Silk server because it helps a lot to kind of speed up the process for installing FlowBat and for the analyst to actually say, oh, well, now I'm used to FlowBat, I should try to use Silk as well, because they kind of step it up from being just the routine analyst looking at old flows to saying, I can automate all this stuff. The actual Silk install, just run these 3 commands. I assure you, you won't get any malware. Just run them without question. When you run them, you can go get the mail or go get a drink or use the restroom or whatever that takes 5 minutes. If you have a non-typical network layout or something like that, you'll probably have to modify silk.conf or sensors.conf, but for the purpose of testing at your house or setting up on basic sensors or anything like that, you should be just fine running these. All of it takes care of dependencies, so again, just run these, and afterwards you should be able to run some queries. And so here is kind of an example. If you have epilepsy, close your eyes. That's a very serious warning. Well, that didn't work. So here I am running some stuff, silkonabox.sh, and I play with the CAD a little bit. I'm looking at the install for Flowbat. I get my shoes on. I'll go get the mail. Basically play with the cat some. That's a Bengal cat named Cheeto, after the cat from Cheetos, the food. Well, so we're done now. So that was like 5 minutes, maybe a little less. That was on a clean, updated Ubuntu box, 14.04 specifically. So if you make an issue about newer Ubuntu, you can join the crowd on GitHub. As far as the RW filter outputs and kind of what they look like and different things like this, I won't go into this too much, but basically you have some basic stuff to say, hey, let's look at the beginning of the current day and the current time. Or you might say, a little more in depth, and I've placed these on multiple lines just so that it's a little easier to read and doesn't look too garbagey. But basically we're looking at like where any IP is from China based on, whatever Maxmind or whatever you're using for your country code map. And we only basically send out, we want the output to be just the 5 tuple. And so what you kind of get is something like what you see at the bottom here. This bottom output is actually from a PCAP conversion, which is several lines. I mean, you have to convert the PCAP, pull it down, convert it, do what you need to do, and then throw it into RW filter, which is kind of a pain. But you'll see that we kind of optimize this a little bit. In that case, it was like some SD bot infected device. So an example of RW stats. Here we're running like a top 10 bytes transferred by protocol, and then a top 10 SIP-DIP pairs combination, and the outputs being things like this. So RW cut is just your raw flows. You see, the flags that were involved, the bytes that were, or the bytes in combination, the records, things like that, and as well as the 5 tuple. RW stats, again, is the statistics tool for Silk. It basically does all these calculations on every flow record that's been in that whole big thing, and it says, oh, well, how many records were there, per field that you specified. In this case, I specified an application field, which is kind of unique to Silk and YAF, that YAF is looking at the actual packet payloads and determining, oh, well, is this DNS traffic or is it HTTP traffic or what is it? So we just, defined application here. And those are how many records for a certain time that we had per application. RW count takes bins of time. In this case, it looks like we were doing 30-second bins, and says how many records were in each one of those bins. How many bytes, how many packets. So in this first bin, in the first 30 seconds, we had 1,380 bytes for that bin. You'll notice the 0.27, and that's because sometimes these bins are split up. Maybe the entire communication was in 42 seconds. Well, in the first 30 seconds, it's going to split that up as much as it can. So, Flowbat. What is Flowbat? Well, it's the front end for Silk. Flow Basic Analysis Tool. You can go to flowbat.com, learn a lot about it. We have a lot of documentation now. By a lot, I mean just a little bit, but it's pretty understandable, and you can kind of go through examples on flowbat.com. And then, again, it's super easy to set up. But, if you want a demo sometime, you can email me or whatnot. I can show you a demo if you don't have 15 minutes to set it up on your own. So how do you get started with Flowbat? I'll kind of run through the same kind of procedure as Silk. It's just as easy. It's just a script, basically. And then if you have some issues, it's probably because you're not actually reaching out to that server that it sets up. So we just run these. And this is going to take a long time by comparison. So like almost double the time. So you'll probably like need to get a drink, or like go fix, prepare some food or whatever. So again, epilepsy warning. Close your eyes. In this case, I'm running the, Flowbat installer. It asks me a couple questions. It needs privileges not to install anything bad. In this case, I'm installing, oh, this is terrible. I'm installing, I'm cooking some chicken. So I'm a big fan, again, of frying food. This is kind of a replica of Chick-fil-A's chicken, but I think it's a little better for their nuggets. And if you have some pretty quality chicken breasts, it's actually quite good for a chicken sandwich as well. I would say it's better. Maybe it's just fresher in the end. I don't know, or maybe I put too much sugar in it, or something like that. But it's pretty good. So basically, what you have here is a regular non-spicy chicken mix, and well, let me check. It's done. So I only got halfway done with my chicken brine, and that took 7 minutes. Chicken brine takes a little longer than 7 minutes. I'll show you the recipe for that at the end. It's like the third giveaway that everyone gets, though. So, Flowbat basics. This is kind of the meat of the conversation. Not that it's going to take another hour, but kind of the takeaway. So, what you see here is that I'm looking at all records for the current day. Again, my little animation's already kind of done. By comparison, before you had to kind of think about what you're doing, specify more than just partitioning switches. You had to specify input switches and output switches, specify RW cut, and all these other things that I know because I love Silk, but most of you probably don't know just right out of the box. You may not know about this protocol switch, but if you look into our help, you'll see, the most basic examples. You'll see some of the things I'm showing you today. But this is essentially Silk. It has autocomplete. You'll see a lot of stuff if you just put -- on there, but it can handle a lot of different things. This is pulling all records for that current day. Here's another example. Again, I showed you the second example for Silk, which was saying any local CIDR and then any Chinese IP address, be it source IP or dest IP. Here I'm showing off the query builder, which is usually probably what people go to first thing because they don't know all of these commands for the I guess the Zen mode at the quick query. But over time, you see that it's building a query at the very bottom in red. Here I say NECC on the additional parameters, because at the time we were missing an NECC field. But it built a query as well, so you can kind of learn what Silk is actually interpreting and saying, oh, well, I know what I need to do, so maybe you'll know what to do next time if you decide to automate this or something. Again, I specified a week on this one, but it came back pretty quickly. And you can, go through the pages and whatnot, or you can reduce these reduce the table down to whatever you want to see. In this case, I'm going to go down to just the 5 tuple. And usually I like to see starting time at the beginning. And then if you wanted to, you can also sort by starting time and do things like that. So here we're using stats. And again, I'm going to use the query builder, even though you can do this through just using a quick query at the little Zen mode command line there. But I'm just going to do one day. I'm using RW stats. We're going to look at the top 10 source IP, dest IP pairs by bytes. So it's going to count up all the bytes, and it's going to say, oh, well, how many were for each one of these? And so there you have it. That went really quickly at the end. I apologize. But here we'll look at a graph, an outbound data graph. So, when you want to specify if it's inbound or outbound, that may depend on, what you've set up for your home nets. Or your IP blocks and how they're arranged in sensors.conf, silk.conf. But out of the box, they should do any kind of local IP addresses. They're already set up in there. So I specified types being out and out web and any kind of outbound ICMP. And I get this graph. It doesn't really look really great. And it's because it's looking at bins. Again, we talked about bins of data. That was looking at 60-second bins. I want to look at 10-minute bins, so it's stacking everything up. So it should split this up a little better. And something like this may give you a good idea of situational awareness, maybe for that total day. Or you can have that like a rolling time. So in this case, I saved it as, some 24-hour outbound data. and we'll put this into a dashboard that I don't see Martin Holstein here. He loves dashboards. So here we are throwing this into the dashboard, and it's already kind of done. So it saves all of these results and allows you to query those periodically. So in this case, I've said, every hour I want you to update this so that I see something new. But you could tell it, every 5 minutes, show me something new or whatever you want to do. Just keep in mind it's running a query. So if your query is kind of dumb and takes way too long, if you're like, yeah, update this month-long query every 5 minutes, then it's going to do a month-long query in Silk every 5 minutes. So just be cognizant of that. And you can take out packets or records or bytes or do whatever you want to there. So here we're looking at non-standard ports. Now, how do you kind of tell what non-standard ports are? It goes back to app labeling. So YAF said, hey, these look like HTTP, but maybe it's not on port 80. Well, if it's that, then go ahead and tell me that. So here I've added this additional parameter. It's a plugin called appmismatch.so. You can make your own plugins, but they're moderately difficult to do. And I also said that, I only want packets that are kind of confirmed communications. So it needs to be like a return thing. So here you have where I've done a count of all of these, or a top 10 of, well, now I've lost it, but you have application and destination port down here. So what that showed was that there were 5 distinct destination ports that were used that were not, typical like 443. So in the next example, you'll actually see some of those that were non-typical according to YAF. So there you have another, like one non-port 80 HTTP port, things like that. So identifying services, I talked about app labeling, and it's pretty awesome. You can just use ports, you can just use whatever you want to, but there's a kind of less false positive prone way. And so here we just use app labeling only. We basically make sure that YAF itself is doing all of this. And I won't go into too much detail because it's just a big, long Silk query is the bulk of this. But at the end, I said, hey, show me source ports and applications. And you'll see that, for instance, like 902 is actually just, that was VMware. But a lot of these, 1800, which is actually Flowbat itself. And it says, hey, that looks like some HTTP stuff. So YAF is able to see those things. Because it just does a little bit of analysis at the packet level, just at some headers. So, if you want to analyze PCAP files, I mentioned, it's like 4 or 5 commands of, pulling this PCAP down, doing whatever you need to do with Silk. But, there's a lot of commands to remember. In this case, if you just have a PCAP that's setting on that Flowbat server, be it, in some PCAP repository or whatever, as long as you have permissions to do this, you can just specify the PCAP. And, tell it whatever protocols it wants to look at. Kind of look at whatever you want to. And it'll do all the conversions, on the Flowbat end. And it'll do everything it needs to do. And then it'll also output everything for you. So, if you had some sort of, PCAP for like, this is some exploit kit traffic, you could easily turn that into, some flow data, without actually having any kind of overhead. So this will be kind of temporary. But it'll also store that output RWF file into a temporary file. So some flow automation. So basically, we looked at Flowbat, which is not really an automated thing. So a lot of people ask about APIs, and we're like, well, Flowbat's just a front end for Silk. So why don't you just run on Silk? And I'm like, well, we still want an API. So I guess they just want like a proxy essentially, because you can just do everything through Silk if you want to. A lot of these commands. Again, that's why we include those commands in Flowbat. You can run any one of those and get the same outputs in Silk at the command line. You obviously won't be able to drag and drop anything or do any kind of sorting easily, but you'll get the basic results from that. And over time, you may learn from that. You may say, oh, well, maybe I want to pull some sort of, list from the internet or something like that, and I want to store it as a set, and I want Flowbat to have a dashboard that references where any source or dest IP is from the set of bad guys. So your script on one end is pulling everything from the internet, making the set list Flowbat, you've told, hey, the set list is located here. Show me all results, and you've saved that and put that in a dashboard. Once you get to doing that, it's pretty fluid. The only downside, again, is you have to know how to script that out, and that takes a little bit of silk knowledge first. You can also expand all of that deployment into the analysis pipeline. It's another tool by the guys at CERT. It's pretty awesome, but it's not as easy to set up, or at least we haven't made it as easy to set up yet. Maybe that should be a focus, but we don't get a lot of requests for it, even though it's pretty awesome. It'll do its own watch list reporting. It'll do all kinds of like tunneling detection, things like that. So like if it sees like any kind of DNS requests that are like abnormally large, or like they're occurring too quickly or something like that, or if like it sees ICMP occurring too quickly from a host, or things that just don't make sense, it'll make an alert for those things, and you can send it to any kind of log solution that you have, and make some alerts out of that. If you want to know more about it, there's the link. There's also tools like Flow Plotter, which I'll talk about in just a second, not in huge detail, just because that was kind of a part one talk. Flow Plotter is being augmented now to remove all Google visualizations, which you'll see in a minute. So what is Flow Plotter? It's just when you're running an RW filter command or any silk command, you can basically pipe all that output to Flow Plotter and make kind of, I'm not saying any plot that you want. It doesn't do Sankey diagrams yet. Martin again. But again, it's just this little bash tool that's it's pretty reliable. And it's open source. You can see what it's doing, so it's not doing anything weird. But again, it requires Google visualizations, and Google visualizations, they require that you don't actually download all of their libraries, but they need to be sourced remotely. It's part of their user agreement. So here's just kind of a splash of some graphs that are available in Flow Plotter. There at the bottom right, you have like a jiggly force-directed graph. Martin had a visualization talk last, I guess 2 or 3 talks ago, and he said that animations that aren't needed shouldn't be there. But I like the jiggle that occurs with the nodes and whatnot. So it's there. It's not incredibly useful. You can't just like throw something out there and be like, man, yeah, I see you the bad guy because he's connected to all these other guys here. It's never gonna do that for you. Instead, what you want to use it for is, you can see some like color coding that I'm doing there. You want to use it to show another colleague or a manager, a network operations guy, this is kind of what I'm looking at. Because if you just show them a table of data, they may not get that. If you just show them this blob of stuff, they won't understand what they're looking at. But here, at least you can convince them that you're right, even if you're wrong. What you see in the middle is kind of a different tool altogether. It's just an asset modeling tool. So basically, you can't really see what it's doing, but basically it says assets at the far left, and then it breaks out into web servers and mail servers and all kinds of other servers, and it'll show you everything that's on your network that it can actually detect and say, this looks like this should be a mail server, and maybe you'll have duplicates in there because maybe some guy's running a security server that's hosting a lot of stuff, and so maybe it'll show up in multiple different trees. But it's pretty cool in that it doesn't require any options. It just says, hey, you've thrown me all this flow data, and now I'm going to throw you a lot of assets here, and some may be wrong, or you may have too many, but it's unlikely they'll be very wrong. It's possibly likely, depending on your environment, they'll be too large. In that case, I do have a thresholding involved. The bottom left, you see a bubble chart, which is kind of a 3-variable chart that allows you to see packets versus bytes versus records. That alone isn't very useful, but you can do things like distinct desk ports for a host compared to distinct desk IPs compared to whatever. Kind of whatever you can think of, which is the hard part, because in anything you do with flow data, you have this answer that you think, oh man, I'm going to get this cool answer, and I'm going to really rule the day. But the question is really hard. You have to be able to word the question in a sentence. So if you can't just say to yourself in just English, say, well, what am I looking for? I want hosts that have reached out to 4 or more distinct destination country codes. That's a sentence. But if you're just I just want to churn through some data and see the bad guys, you're not going to find that. And I'm not going to use any kind of hype words like hunting, but you know, that kind of stuff requires prerequisite knowledge on, you know, how to approach it. You can't just find the bad guys, you know, point to it, the bad guys are in there. The rest of your stuff, you have, you know, your typical line chart, and that's based on like the bins of, you know, packets or bytes, you know, over time. And you have bar charts and whatnot, that they work pretty well if you throw them into a dashboard or something like that as an iframe. But you can just, if you want to, use like, you know, Python's really simple HTTP server to just host these, and, you know, people can look at them and make your own dashboard. Another summary of Silk, and almost done here. It's extremely fast. It's really easy to manipulate stuff if you're really good at scripting. Again, it's a lot of data, but they offer tools to whittle down the data as well. It's got awesome documentation, and again, more tools are coming out to actually, you know, analyze this stuff. I'm updating FlowPlotter to get rid of all the, you know, very happy colors and make them more, you know, Web 3, 4, 5.0, whatever we're at right now, to make them look more hip. But it also, again, I'm pretty pumped about the different options you have. I'm basically freeing it up to where you're not limited to bytes, packets, and records, but, you know, anything that you want, any kind of like distinct counts or anything. It makes it a little more challenging to figure out what your input is, but your output is all that more valuable. Flowbat, again, is a graphical front end to Silk. It can install super easy. Not going to give you a seizure again to show you how easy, but you can rapidly pivot from data. I didn't show all the examples of, you know, you can click a time, for instance, say, I want the previous 5 minutes of records, and it's going to put a, you know, this huge long query out there that would, you know, you would be punching in numbers just to figure that out on a calendar or whatever, but it'll just, you know, decide all that for you. It has some visualizations and whatnot, dashboards, whatever you want, and again, it's by analysts for analysts, and so I use it pretty much all the time. Chris uses it. A lot of people are using it now. And so when people say we want a certain feature in it, we take it seriously, not seriously enough to probably work on it immediately or stop eating to fix something, but we take it pretty seriously. Actually, to fix bugs, we jump on those pretty quick. So, yeah, flowbat.com. You have the source if you want to go look at that. And in conclusion, you should probably be using Flowdata. It's super easy to set up. If you have a really, you know, dispersed environment, maybe it's difficult. If you don't have any security posture at all, like you don't have a tap or any sensor or anything like that, you may find it's pretty difficult to set up your own flow generation, just because, I mean, you probably should have those things. I doubt you have alerting or anything if you don't have those. It's really easy to collect stuff from it. It makes analysis much easier for, you know, pivoting from large data sets to the PCAP you want. And it's minimal barriers to entry. Here's your first giveaway, which everyone wins. It is the recipes for that chicken, which I swear to you is the best non-spicy chicken I've ever had. I assume this is recorded. And then I appreciate it very much. There's my contact. If you want to go buy Applied Network Security Monitoring, you can get it at Amazon and basically feel good that you're donating it to charity. Also, when you buy it at Amazon, go to smile.amazon.com, because that is a percentage of every purchase you make goes towards a charity of your choice. It can be Rural Technology Fund, which would be awesome, but it can be whatever charity you want it to be. Not a lot of people are aware of it, but it costs nothing to you, and it doesn't change your Amazon, you know, browsing or anything like that. It's just free money for charities, free at Amazon's expense. So, that's it. Any questions? Yes. Any other questions?
When you use a fryer, it sounded like it was a pressure fryer?
Yeah, it's solid. It's very solid. It's steel, and
you use a regular fryer?
It will. If you use like a pressure cooker, it will explode. like it's a lot of terrible videos. And a regular fryer is okay, and this will work in a regular fryer. Yeah.
Thank you.
It'll take longer.
Is there a difficulty if you have to use like gluten-free flour?
Gluten-free is better. It makes crispier breading.
Okay.
Yeah, or you can mix vodka with your marinade, and it'll like reduce the gluten for regular flour.
So I just
Okay, yeah.
thank you.
So bro-con logs, for one, like the con logs themselves, and they're actually quite different as far as we're looking at unidirectional flows when I use like IPFix or FPro. Other tools like Argus, it's another flow tool that looks at bidirectional stuff. Bro-con logs are bidirectional. Like bro-con logs are pretty awesome in their own. I'd never recommend someone to just get rid of them. But like, I guess when it comes down to like, if it was one or the other, I always recommend flows just because, again, the storage that bro-con will require for the same amount of data. Now, granted, bro-con actually requires less storage, for what I've seen at least, than just churning a bunch of flows into Elasticsearch or something like that. And part of it's because bro actually, there's a little more data to it. People will say, oh, bro is like flow. What's like faux flow? It's bro faux flow. It is, it's a tongue twister. But bro-cons are awesome. I'm definitely not bashing bro-cons. Like if you already have like a bunch of bro logs and they're going to Elasticsearch or something like that, then maybe you'll say, well, yeah, I already have bro-con data and maybe it's already good enough. But ask yourself how far back you can store those bro-con logs. And, if you can't store more than like 30 days, either maybe store more of them or consider a flow solution, because flows take up, no space at all by comparison of, any kind of raw text like that. Because again, like bro-con, there's no like special format. They're just strings, right? So it's stored in a pretty substantially larger format. If you compress them, you have to deal with the compression and things like that. But again, if you throw it into Elasticsearch, all that is compressed and, on the way. So, good question. Anybody else?
Yeah. Hi, this is Joseph. I'm just wondering, you mentioned this is your favorite non-spicy chicken.
Yeah.
You'd be releasing your favorite spicy.
As soon as I get it fixed up, I will. I work on it. I'm pretty diligent about it, but it's not perfect yet, and I don't feel confident to go to a conference with it yet. But maybe it'll be its own talk. I don't know. I'll trick you into listening to only that.
Do you have a recommendation for a home fry?
Yeah. It's this,
Smile.amazon.com.
you won't be able to buy it there. It's this Pressure Magic pressure fryer, and it's a big crank on the top, big steel crank, so it doesn't explode.
Okay, thank you.
Use a lot of oil. No more questions? Or any more questions? Put negative connotation on that. Okay, well, I appreciate... Oh, no. I have giveaways. You're supposed to remind me. You did not. You all lose. Yeah, all right. So we have this this dual-com tap. Who knows the two most common flow types? That is it. NetFlow version 5 and 9. You have to fight for this. Who can race to get it? It's up to you. Everyone clap. Yes. Yes. Congratulations. Okay, Applied Network Security Monitoring. Mediocre book by two mediocre gentlemen. Let's see. Right. I've been called a ruffian no less than 3 times a day in talks. So yeah, thank you. I guess name 3 raw flow solutions. Ryan Stillions. Those are 3 flow types. That's good enough. Because no one... Wait a minute. What was the last one? NF dump? Yeah. That is true. Sorry, Ryan. You win. It is not autographed. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess that's it. I didn't mean to keep you too long, so have a good evening.